Hello, this is Nick, the Dark Yogi, and welcome to Kisma and the Dark Yogi, brought to you by SourceMovement.com. We're here for people who want to be radically authentic and courageously vulnerable. So whether you're a yoga teacher, an entrepreneur, or a leader building a tribe, we're here to get your energy and your mindset positioned for success. No more stress, no more lack of energy. It's time to lead with your full potential. Our intention is to leave the world a better place than we found it and inspire you to do the same. So hey, if this message in our podcast resonates with you and you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to Kisma and the Dark Yogi on iTunes. While you're there, give us a rating, let us know what you think, and if you have somebody in your life that would enjoy this conversation, please go ahead and share it with them as well. If you want more information about the movement, all you have to do is go to SourceMovement.com. But for now, let's get the show started. I hope you enjoy this episode of Kisma and the Dark Yogi.
We're really, really grateful for each and every one of you. We're so happy that you're here with us tonight in our energetic presence. And it's really 2015 is, I keep saying this, but it's the truth. It's going to be a year of extreme wisdom and certainty. So when we combine those two, when we are really moving with the wisdom and we're certain, we become empowered. And that's a really great place for a yogi to be. Because when we're empowered, then we lead by example in a compassionate and heartfelt way. So we're in final years of ascension on this planet, and I think it's up to us to really lead that and do the best we can. So super grateful for being here. I'm going to be asking Nick, the Dark Yogi's here. He had brought up some interesting insights from shares from you guys. And so we thought we would talk about this on the call. And you know, I remember back to one of my very first yoga classes, one of the teachers said, "Don't be surprised if you start to cry in class." And I was like, what? And over time, it reveals itself, right? The practice of yoga is such a spiritual practice, but we're also diving into our bodies and we're achieving things. And so there will be moments where we as practitioners or as students feel that emotion shift. And we might just call it energy. Like from my perspective, it's going to be, oh yeah, it's energy. It's moving through the body, through the spirit. And some people just know it as emotion. So whatever that is, it's fine. But it happens and it's real. So we wanted to share some of that because I think we also all know what it's like to go into a yoga class and just be kind of going through the poses, going through the class, the teacher really not saying anything of significance, and leaving going, you know, something was missing. I'm not sure what it is, but something just wasn't there. And when we look at the 3D of the practice, like the whole piece, there needs to be a body component. There needs to be an emotional component. There needs to be a spiritual component. And that's where people start to have their shifts. And that's why they come back, because they know they've been in a space that's been held energetically with integrity and with care and with compassion. So I'm just going to start off again by saying thank you for being here and say hey to Nick, the Dark Yogi, who's always got something on his mind. You know that, for those of you that know him.
Hey, well, I'm really happy to be here. It's a funny format for us. Like, it's really fun to interview each other, actually.
It is fun, right?
Yeah, we hang out, you know, and, like, you know, we have our relationship and everything like that. And, like, I forget, like, sometimes, like, there's just, like, a gold mine of information inside Kisma's crazy head there. It's really amazing, right?
Well, I could say the same for you, Mr. Crazy Head.
Yeah, I'm sure you get that. And you would be right. But it's really interesting to actually just sit down in this format and ask each other some questions and to then just open up the dialogue for all of you to see what comes up for you along the way. So I'm excited for this conversation. Yeah. This is a really important piece because if you're out there teaching, if you're doing the stuff that we're helping you to do, then you're probably bringing up some things for some people.
Totally.
And good job. So we want to help you manage that in a really powerful way. and also to stay in integrity with who you are and with where you're at so that you feel good about it as well. Yeah.
Right. And before we really dive in, let me just say if by some chance we get dropped, we'll be back on. Okay. California's got some interesting internet out here, but we will be back on. So if you hear something shift, just hang on. But I want to start it out because I know that for me, and I can also share a little bit with Nick as I've known him for quite a while. There's a time and a point in almost every yoga teacher's life where they realize they're teaching more than asana, than postures, and then poses. And that moment can be extremely exciting. It can also be really, really scary. For me, it was when I owned the studio that I had, and I happened to say to someone who walked in, "Hey, how are you?" And this woman proceeded to tell me stuff about her and her family that I wasn't prepared, because I thought I was just going to be like, "How are you?" And she'd be like, "I'm okay," like we all do. And it was such a humbling moment for me because, number one, she trusted me to share some really important things that were going on in her family. And I knew I'd better get my shit together as an owner of a studio and as a teacher, because if someone was going to share something like what she did, I better at least have a resource that I could send her to if I didn't know how to guide her. And that's pretty much the first time that I decided to head off to India and do more in-depth study. Nick, so let me just start out by asking you, do you remember the first time you were teaching a class or interacting with students and you had this, "Oh, wow, I'm more than just a physical yoga teacher. This job is more than directing people through a flow"?
That's a good question. Do I remember my first time? I don't know that I remember my first time. Mm-hmm. When I came into yoga, when teaching yoga, I've been practicing yoga for several years, and I knew that possibility was there because I saw it in my own life. Like my past with yoga, coming in basically for physical injuries, and then going off and trying to get good at it on my own, and then kind of coming back after another physical injury. And really noticing like, wow, there's something much more here. Mm-hmm. And I started to look at myself in a different way, and things started to come up for me. So it was really still a few years after that I started teaching. Mm-hmm. And when I started teaching, like that was always something that I was kind of present to, was that possibility was there. Now, the interesting thing that I did though, at the beginning is I thought like, well, it's just me. And because I knew what a mess I was, and I was pretty much a disaster, in many ways. And I would feel like, oh, my students kind of have it together. That stuff's not going to come up for them. And
you separated yourself.
Yeah. So it was like, that happened for me, and that was really awesome, and it was really helpful for me. But they got their stuff together, it's not going to come up for them, So when when things did start to come up, I guess I wasn't super surprised, but it wasn't something I necessarily was like aiming for,
Got it. And then moving forward, when was the point that you realized this was going to be a consistent piece in your practice and in your teaching, that transformation was right there for people, not just you, but for your students? But in order to have that transformation, there needed to be something of a process, or at least a space held for someone to flush through what they were going through.
I kind of just got sick of hearing myself teaching on such a superficial level.
Okay.
And I was teaching a lot of classes, a week, and, you can really only do that so many times before you just start to go nuts, and you're saying the same thing and teaching the same poses and finding really neat ways to describe the shoulder blades and all this stuff. And it was just really not fulfilling. And then, at a certain point too, it was like my teacher or my students were sharing some things with me, like, oh, well, you said this in class, or I just really like the way you are. I just really like, I just want to be, around and in the class. It just feels really good, that I started to realize that, this really, it really does make a difference in people's lives. Like
right.
I am, in some small way, I'm impacting people's lives. And I felt like, whoa, I felt a little overwhelmed, actually, because I was like, oh my God, they're counting on me for something. And then
totally.
It was like, well, can I deliver that again? What if I don't say something really smart and really witty? What if I don't, say something deep and profound, or, basically, what if I'm not good enough? They're counting on me.
It's really interesting. It brings up a memory for me too. It was around a Christmas, not sure what year, but a few years ago. And a woman came up to me and she goes, I remember a year ago in class on Christmas Eve, you said this, and it really, I really took it to heart, and it really changed my life. And I was like, what? And it kind of shook me up because I had no recollection of what I said. And so it was kind of like, all right, I better make sure that everything that comes out of my mouth is at least with the intention that I direct it towards the highest. It's like right now I'm on this path of how can every decision I make in my life be directed towards the highest? So how can every word that comes out of my mouth, and it doesn't mean I'm going to nail it all the time, but let's face it, if we have an intention like that behind ourselves when we're walking into the room to teach, chances are we will leave the drama out of the room and really come from a place, that's why we say, be radically authentic. You don't have to be better than who you are. You don't have to be different. You just need to be authentic, because that is the way you hold a space energetically that is safe and compassionate and of integrity.
Well, yes, it's really interesting that you bring that up, though, is because holding the highest, there was a moment, I wish I could remember the exact moment, but I honestly don't really remember the exact moment, but I just realized, wow, man, this is really about something so much bigger, and I have a big opportunity here and a big responsibility. It's probably about the same time that I started to freak out, because I realized that people actually heard what I said. And then, I did want it to be all about the higher. And it was all about the higher.
Okay. And so it was unrelatable.
It was totally unrelatable. And I started to get into that space of way over teaching and really just trying to deliver the highest of the high. And it's freaking yoga class. There's a lot going on in there. You're not going to get to all that stuff.
Right.
So I sort of I guess I'm a little bit of an extremist that way, where it's this is the best thing ever. And then I try to do all that for a while. And it was okay. I attracted a different audience for sure. And I attracted people who were really interested in that, but it was just such a narrow audience and a narrow message that it really didn't, it wasn't, then I would get kind of the opposite end of that, of the anxiety of trying to come up with something new and creative every time. Well,
that's a big piece of it, isn't it, everyone? I mean, when you feel like you have to top yourself in the next class, and I did this, and this goes with a physical, if you're teaching arm balances or inversions, how do I top that next week? That starts to take us down a road that gets a little bit hairy and very confusing. There's nothing to top. It's just about that higher sense of being, but connected, right? So it's a connective message, and it's just who we are. It's authentic. I just keep coming back to that word because I so value it.
Yeah, exactly. And really what it comes down to actually is karma yoga in action, right?
Perfect.
So you are always holding the highest, there is the highest thing. With still holding that highest, there's that highest for your ideal, but then there's where everybody in that class can go.
Right. Got it.
And every individual has a separate capacity. So really what you're talking about is karma yoga, and it's just making sure that everything that you do supports that.
Okay.
Right? So for me, for like the longest time, it's like, I didn't want to be like the funny guy, it's like the smart guy. So I'm trying to be really smart and everything like that. And that way people will think I'm, worthy or, trustworthy or, knowledgeable about what I'm talking about, and they'll, have more faith in me or whatever. Like, I don't know, whatever convoluted thing was going on in my head, but that's kind of where I was going with it. Well, when I started to laugh in class and have some fun, poke a little bit of fun at the yoga world or yoga people or at myself, all those kinds of things. On the surface level, it might really seem like, oh, he doesn't take it seriously, or it's just kind of a joke, or a little irreverent or something like that. And it is that, but at the end of the day, like, there's a huge value in laughing and joyful and having fun, and bringing that in there. Now, where the dots and all the pieces really start to come together is when you can use that as a bridge to the highest. So if it's just about laughing and having fun, it's going to be a laughing and having fun class, but they may not take that away. Like, they'll laugh, and that's good. Like, if people are walking out of your class smiling, that's a win. That's really good. But when you're able to connect that to your highest vision, and just in simple terms, all that has to be is like the highest version of yourself, like your best self, your full potential self. Great. When you can use those sorts of tools like laughter and joy or space and quietude to connect to that highest ideal, well, that's karma yoga in action.
So it's really kind of, if I understand correctly, it's exploring the array of emotions that we have as human beings.
Exactly.
I kind of sense it to music. We're both musicians, and in one symphony, we'll go through so many different keys. Some will be a major, bright, happy key. Other keys will be a minor, dark, sort of sad. The rhythm and the tonality and the percussiveness and the writing can take us into an agitated state. Like, there's so much that a really great composer can help a listener feel emotionally. So as yoga teachers, we're sort of doing the same thing, only I look at it as we're just there to, like, let them be real. So it's not a manipulation of their emotions. It's not an instigation. It's just like, let what arises come up.
Yes. Yeah, don't resist.
Don't resist.
Don't resist. But it's, yes, like, the more fully and authentically that you express yourself, the more space that they have for those emotions to come up in themselves.
Right.
Because when it's, I didn't mean to interrupt, but when it's like super controlled, and I don't know, we've seen a lot of this, especially out in California, like these super controlled classes, like everything's got to be a certain way and it's all very tedious. Well, your emotional capacity in that is somebody's just put a stranglehold on that, like, because they have a stranglehold on themselves. Like, they're not letting themselves express really authentically and openly. And so what that creates is either like an audience who is just really just interested in that and not anything else. So it's a very, very narrow focus, or frustration. Because when the teacher and the leader is suppressing themselves, then that is going to translate to everybody in the class. And you don't allow the space for that to come up. Okay.
Wow. Yeah, I can feel that happening many times. So let's look at, I'm sure most of us remember, or maybe some of you have not yet experienced, but you probably will in your teaching career, that student that bursts into tears or gets up and leaves the room or even gets angry. Believe it or not, I mean, I have had students get angry at me in the middle of yoga class for whatever they think the reason was. That reason really had nothing to do with it. There was something else coming up, and there was like a burst. So this is reality. This happens. Nick, what do you think, what do we do to manage and to support and to help, just like I use that, those words to kind of flush it out or process it during a class?
Well, there's a lot, and there's no end to the situations that can arise. Mm-hmm. We have a good friend who's a very active teacher who's just had the most bizarre things happen in his classes.
Totally. It's a weird karma.
Yeah, it's bizarre. And I've had some weird stuff, to be sure, definitely some weird things come up. The number one thing is definitely, don't resist. Mm-hmm. Just, if you put up that blocker and you tense up and are like, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's just going to make it harder for you, and it's going to draw more attention to whatever that disturbance is. Mm-hmm. So number one is definitely don't resist. Just be like, wow, this is awesome. It's coming up for a reason, and it's presenting me and this person with a great opportunity to resolve something.
Right.
So if you always keep that in mind of it's coming up for a reason, and there's an opportunity there to unfold. Mm-hmm. And then now you're out of self-preservation, situation management mode, and now you're in creative problem-solving mode. Mm-hmm. I'm like, wow, this is very interesting. A great example is heat. If you teach heated classes, mm-hmm. it's always going to be too cold for somebody, and it's always going to be too hot for somebody.
Yeah. Right.
And sometimes they're really vocal, so hot, and they're telling you during class to turn it down. So that's where the teacher has an opportunity of go and turn it down to cater to that student's preference, or help that student deal with the situation. So, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. And that's where the resistance can come in, where you just try to ignore it, and then it's you've got this whole second dialogue of am I going to turn it down? Am I not going to turn it down?
In your head.
Yeah, in your head, and they're still looking at you, so you've got kind of a body language, eye contact dialogue going on too, which is always weird. It's what are you going to do? I invite it right into the class. If something like that comes up, it's hey, if this is really too hot for you, take a child's pose or a drink of water. But make it a part of the message. How many times in your life do you want to just run because it's uncomfortable? Mm-hmm.
Right, because if we cater to one student, then the next one wants it hotter, and we've just created a vicious cycle.
And you've given away control of your class.
You have.
Yeah.
This I've seen too, not to get off topic, but it's resonant with, I've seen some teachers come in and say, okay, what's everyone want to do today? And two people might say, I want to work on handstands. Someone else is like, oh, I want to do my hips. It's blown. Because what do you do? Are you really polling the class to design your class? Or I feel like sometimes that's done to sort of please the students, but you can't because someone will be displeased. So you can ask people privately, hey, what's going on? How's your body feeling? Blah, blah, blah. And certainly as you start class and see how people are moving, you'll know if you've got the right plan or not. That to give up that kind of control, it's going to stir things up later.
Yeah, it's just going to create problems later. Right. It just creates problems. It's your class. Take control of your class. Mm-hmm. Do what you know is right.
Cool. Yeah, right.
So, yeah, that's honestly the mindset behind it. Number one is just so important. Welcome. What a great opportunity. Mm-hmm. And it's so hard.
Let's just make sure that's clear. So you're saying the mindset behind any sort of dissonance or emotions or something that's coming up with a student, we just welcome it. It's an amazing opportunity.
Amazing opportunity.
Okay.
Amazing opportunity. And you can, just bring it right in. Mm-hmm. Bring it right, let it be there because it's already there.
Right.
So you try to put a box around it and keep it contained, unless something really bizarre is happening, then you might kick somebody out. I've never had to do that. But, if it's really disruptive. But at the end of the day, mostly it's in that example, it's too hot, I can't, whatever. It's take a child's pose. That's a great opportunity for that person to learn how to be in that. And your job is to welcome that, because if you welcome that, then that gives them permission to be with it. Mm-hmm. If you resist it, they're going to try and do the same thing. They're going to try and resist it too. And what happens when you resist it, especially for somebody who's already overheated, they're going to get hotter.
Right.
So you're actually exacerbating. Thank you. That was a tough one for me. The problem. Cool. So, and then you can give them, like, if they need a little extra attention, like I've had this before, this is like, it's so hot, and I can see that they're a newer student, especially because it's with newer students, more experienced students that are acclimated to it. Go over to them and be like, hey, just take a quick second and say, hey, like, make sure that you get some water. If you really need some air, go get some air. Like, I don't want anybody harming themselves. And I don't know their medical history, if they're asthmatic or, like, who knows? Like, they could have an attack or who knows what, So you give them some of those things. Or teach them the cooling breath. Hey, and then they're cool because they got, like, the extra little thing that nobody else got. You're like, hey, if you roll your tongue like this and sip the air through it like a straw, it's actually really cooling for your body. Why don't you do that a few times in child's pose? Great breath. And if you can't roll your tongue, you just kind of make an O sound with your lips. Right. So let's look at, because I know, as I mentioned, this has happened to me, and I just kind of want to share with everybody out there that if someone ends up contentious or angry with you, one of the most powerful things that we can do as teachers is to listen, certainly not take any sort of abuse. I'm not talking about the person that's screaming or yelling. I don't know if any of us have experienced that, but just someone who's got something going on, right? And they're agitated. Know one thing. Most likely, 98% of the time, it is not about you. Even though they might be making it about you or your playlist or your heat or your flow or your yoga pants or your whatever, there is something else going on. But they don't know this, but energetically and spiritually, they're in a place where they actually feel safe to let the anger out. So there's not necessarily this intellect guiding them, but their spirit feels safe, so they'll let it out. And sometimes we'll take it and we'll be like, holy crap. And we want to defend what we're doing. We certainly don't want to be the yoga teacher that's making people upset. So there can be a shift in our energy. The best thing we can do is hold the space and really go to your full potential self and speak to their full potential self. And usually what will happen is that you thank them and then you begin to ask a few questions, like what's really going on? And if you can't do it, if the opportunity isn't there, you make sure there's a time that you can get on the phone or just talk real quickly before or after a class and have a discussion, because this is when it gets deeper. This is when the teachings can really become an effect. You've just allowed someone to share and you're opening yourself up to hear them. Doesn't mean you're going to agree, but they just want to be heard. Yeah, they need a space for something there. And if you just go from your full potential self and just talk to their full potential self, like sometimes that can create a little bit more conflict. What's really helpful to preempt that is to call out their full potential self. Mm-hmm. So before you dive in with what's really going on here, you just call them. I'm like, wow, thanks for being here. And I can tell that you're really passionate about having a great yoga experience. Mm-hmm. I like that a lot. Right. So you calling out their full potential, and giving them, then it's like, yes. Like then they feel acknowledged, and you're also acknowledging that part of them. When you just go straight to their full potential, like they don't know what's happening. Mm-hmm. And that
good point, really good point.
Yeah, and it'll just like grease the wheels for that. Mm-hmm. You can do it the other way, but it's like cool. It can be a little rockier. Cool. And I know we have a couple questions. We're going to come to questions in a second. Nick, let me ask you, what about the tears and the sad emotion, or just the emotion that's arising in a student and they're not sure what's going on? Okay, so there's a lot there. Again, like there's a lot, like this is a huge topic, just by the way. But really, like that's a really natural part, you know. I remember one class for me, and it was a yin class, and it was just like the last thing in the world that I expected was to be, you know, just really bawling my eyes out in this pose, and I mean, I knew what was coming up for me, but I just didn't expect it, and it was very disarming. So just know.
So you were practicing in the class.
I was practicing in the class, and that's the first time I really had that experience. And your place is not to fix everything.
Mm.
And I know that, like, you're all, like, really loving, nurturing people, and you want everybody to be okay, and you want to fix everything, but it's really not your job to fix everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's not your job to fix anything about them, actually. So during the class, if I see it happening, a lot of times, like, people are super sneaky, so I don't even know. They're like, oh my God, I was crying so much in this pose. I'm like, wow, I didn't even notice, you know. Just because, like, they're good at hiding it, you know. So that might be another question I would ask later, you know. How often do you really hide that stuff? But if I see it, I'll bring a box of tissues over and just kind of check in. Like, it's a real gentle hand on the shoulder that says, are you okay? Do you need anything from me? And most of the time they don't.
They just need to release.
Right. They just need to let it go. And then that's definitely a person that you want to circle back to after class and say, hey, how's it going? You know? And a lot of times they'll feel way better. They'll just feel like, wow, that was awesome.
Right.
You know? So the tears, you know, the tears and that kind of emotion is really valid. And if I have a space to talk with them after class, I'm usually, you know, I'll ask, you know, like, hey, if you don't mind sharing, you know, what was it for you that came up?
Right. That's really great. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's really nice to ask that sort of in a permission way. Like, if you don't mind, I'd just like to ask what was coming up. You know, you don't have to share, but there's something in today's world when we're able to ask permission, like, can I ask you something? Would you like to share this? Again, it puts them in that safer environment. And to circle back to what Nick said, it's not our job to fix them or fix anything. You know, remember, we lead by example, and we hold the space that is safe and positive and of integrity. The conversation will continue if it's supposed to, and your expertise through the work that you're doing will guide them in the way that it should, but we can't change people's lives in that way of, like, fixing. We can just lead by example and lead them into their transformation.
Yeah, and the fixing thing is like that'll just create a lot of conflict, like just confusion, you know. It's like then you're trying to have a role, and you might wind up taking on something that is just really not something that you need to be taking on.
Yeah.
You know?
Unless you're stepping into a role of, like, a spiritual coach. Yeah,
like coaching, consulting, or, you know, if you're a counselor, you know, or something like that. Like, that's different, and then it should be different.
And it should be different.
It should totally be different.
Yeah. Cool. Should we pause and take a few questions, or was there something else you wanted to insert?
No, I think really just the fixing thing is, like, stay out of it. Like, so here's, you know, and sometimes, I know that you mentioned before, like, when somebody comes up to you and they just basically, like, unload on you after class. I've had that happen to me several times, you know, like they're just kind of going off about this. And the best thing that you can do, I used to get confused because I was like, well, you know, what do they want? Like, are they just venting or what? And so just ask them, like, do you just need a space to you know, share this? Or are you asking for help? Would you like some help? And if you ask them, again, just to get clear with what they want, then you can, you know, be there for them a lot easier. Oh, I just need a place. I just need to let it out a little bit. I'm like, awesome, man. Like, let it rip.
Yeah.
You know, let it go. But if they're really stuck and they really need some help, you know, it's like, okay, well, let me see what I can do. Right. I'll do the best that I can. And you know, and then that's where you can use all of your resources. If you're experienced with that, you know, set up another call, you know, get them into a coaching program or something. If you have, you know, if they need some, you know, some therapy, refer them to a therapist, you know, give them resources and help them in any way you can, and then keep the dialogue going. That's how you build a relationship with your students that'll last, and that's how you get students that'll follow you everywhere.
Right. Love it.
So,
Cool. I love it. Well, let's pause. A few questions.
Hey, I was just wondering, how do you know you're talking to, or how do you start this thing where you're talking from your higher self to another person's higher self?
I love that you asked that question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, first thing is to make sure that you're really in your full potential self, honestly, for every class that you're teaching, there's that process in the first module. There's a little audio that goes with it, but it's a really simple process. It's just like breathing to get grounded in your body, coming to a peaceful place, and then inviting in your full potential. You're pretty sensitive to energy, so you'll probably feel your crown light up.
Yeah.
And some things like that. And it's different for everybody, though.
It's basically an invitation to the highest version of you, your full potential self, to come forward. And that full potential self is with you, therefore it is you.
For you to embody it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's number one. Like, if you're coming from that place and grounded in that place, so you do have to be in your body to be in that place, then you'll be able to communicate with them way more effectively. But like I said, like, your full potential self can say some pretty intense stuff. And in that setting, it may not be easy for somebody to take. So how you invite in their full potential self is just call it out. Just look at and see their full potential self, and then just call that person out. It could be any number of things. Like, somebody's pissed after class because they didn't like a song that I played. It's like, wow, man, I can thank you. I can really tell how passionate you are about yoga and what happens here. Thanks for sharing that. Why don't you tell me some more?
I like that. And then what I love to do, and you will, Annette, you'll feel like when I'm speaking from my full potential self, my crown chakra just lights up, and I think of speaking from my crown chakra to the other person's crown chakra. But when we're speaking to the entire class, the intention is my full potential self is going to speak to everyone's full potential self in this room. And you either just go forward how you're going to teach, or you could just say, take an inhale and invite the highest version of you to your mat. The highest.
I like that.
Right? Yeah, and everybody likes it because they're like, wow, yeah, and what happens when we invite the highest? We automatically start to think of the qualities that are so important to us. And so we start to go in that direction. Well, the highest form of me would be really focused and calm and loving and compassionate. And you could even talk about that. If you're wondering, by the way, everyone, as you come to hands and knees and start cat-cowing, if you're wondering what the highest version of you, what are those qualities that you hold dear? Is it compassion? Is it love? Is it connected? Is it wisdom? Is it just being super smart? Because it's not wrong. It's what is most important to you. And if you can think of those qualities, it's because you have them. So let's take our yoga practice from that space. Exhale, downward facing dog, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that helps.
I don't want to get, but some of you have heard the story. It was just a year ago when I wrecked a car, back on 94 in Michigan. It was that really snowy day. And, by the time, like, it's New Year's Day, by the time the police officer arrived, he was like not happy. And I got in the car and I'm like, oh man, this isn't going to go well. Like, he was just not pleased to be there. And I was like, all right, I'm going to call my full potential self. And I looked at him and I'm like, I'm going to speak to his full potential self. And I thought, what does he need? And all I said was, officer, it's New Year's Day. How long have you been on duty? And he stopped. He's like, oh, I worked at the casinos last night and I'm on my way home. And I went, wow, you've had a long shift. I'm really grateful that you stopped. Thank you. The entire energy of the car shifted. I got off with a very small ticket. But most importantly, it was this horrible feeling. It was like there was a connection. All I asked was, what does he need to hear? right? And it was amazing. So when we can speak like that to other people's full potential self and pause like that, what do they need right now? It's a different life to live. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Cool.
Helpful?
Helpful.
Good.
Awesome. How this came up was somebody was looking for new music, and then through just a little bit of dialogue, it became, well, I stopped playing a certain kind of music because some stuff came up for some people. And that's a perfect example. Like, it's a great opportunity. Like, it's an opportunity to have a conversation of like, wow, like this song, like, brought up something for you. Like, tell me a little bit more about that. What was that about? And that's where you can start to get into not fixing, but just pure curiosity. Just pure curiosity of like, wow, like, what was that like for you? How did it make you feel? And then you have to kind of really look at the reality of the situation. So, wow, like, so every time this song comes on the radio, you're going to have to deal with these emotions. How's that going to work out in your life?
And what else is bringing up these emotions in your life?
Yeah. How many other songs can't you listen to? So it brings up that opportunity. And then, because when you bend for them in a way like that, and shy away from it, it just, not only is it a missed opportunity, but also you start to erode your confidence in teaching a class that's very authentic to you.
Yeah.
And then when you start to do that, then you'll start to attract people who just aren't really your people.
Right.
Who are, because you're being somebody that you're not, and then they're going to want you to keep being that person that you're not. And so then it creates that whole cycle. It's a whole downdraft cycle.
Well, and energetically, it's out of integrity, because internally you'll be like, this isn't me, but I'm trying to be somebody else. So you'll feel it. You'll feel how out of integrity it is. And I don't mean that in you're wrong or you're right. It's just energetically there's confusion. The studio that I had, there was a teacher, Laura. She's so awesome, but she would play some like heavy metal songs, and it was just her, like, that's what she loved. And every now and then someone would come out of the class and be like, I can't listen to that music. And I'm like, then find another class, because this is her and she loves this music, and she has enough students that love this music, and she's awesome. So understand, we can't, and this is just taking some really strong marketing tools and putting it in our yoga teaching. We can't be for everybody. And in fact, when we start to polarize and take a stand for something, our tribe then begins to build. It's the mediocre, middle of the road, everything out there in the world that really doesn't create any momentum. So when you step in, you're like, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. Take it or leave it. I'm okay. I love you just the same. Talk about empowerment and certainty in that, and a lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
It's really a cool place to be. Really cool. Just be like, okay, you want vanilla and I'm strawberry? No problem. Go to this person's class. He or she's really awesome. Do you know the freedom that gives you when you can honestly recommend one of your peers and just say, go to this class if you don't like mine. I'm okay with it. Man, it's just that kind of energy in your presence will attract even more people. They'll flock to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it creates abundance for everybody. Of like,
totally.
You don't want to keep somebody where they're not going to be happy.
Well, and it just keeps you in your space of, this is who I am. This is what I'm teaching. Not to say that we want to be closed-minded and I can never change and do better and shift it up. Like, keep the spirit of, think different and be innovative in your teaching. Always look for that something else that you really love and helps you to be unique, but really serves the studio that you're teaching at. But it's okay if people don't like your class or your music or your flows or whatever, because I guarantee there's enough people that really love it.
Yeah, your people are out there. I don't know, I remember one time somebody was pissed with me because I didn't, teach enough of the physical, right? It was like, they were like, I'm trying to think what their words were. It was more like, it's a yoga class. Like I thought we'd learn more about the physical, like you didn't hardly talk about the physical. And I was like, oh, first thing, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that with me. I really appreciate it. By the way, because whenever anybody shares something like that with you, like you got a live one. So there's somebody in your class who gave a shit enough to come up to you and tell you what they thought.
Yeah.
And that's a live one. That's a person that you want, you want to vet that person out. Like, is this because if you can convert them, that's one of the people that are going to be around for a while. So anyway, he gave me this thing, all about this, and I'm like, whoa, we actually talked about this and this, and if you notice, like, this was a theme that I carried throughout class. And so the reason I don't teach everything about every pose is because it's hard for people to absorb that much, and this is a long-term thing. It takes a while for this to integrate into people's practices, but at the end of the day, I said, if you really want more of that, and this, it might not be the class for you, and I send them to somebody else.
Great.
It's like, okay, well, somebody teaches more in that style. I don't want somebody in there who's wanting to be something different.
And being frustrated.
Yeah, like you don't want that frustration in there for them.
Good, cool. Look, there's the typical yoga teacher coming from our heart. Everything's like Om Shanti Shanti, and to me a lot of fluff. And then there's the real raw coming from our heart. And when we're real and we come from our heart, generally your people will come back. And the beauty of like what you described, I remember I did a training with Baron Baptiste, and one of the things, the biggest takeaway, he's like, you can plan your class, but you can't project it. Like, be prepared, but walk into that room knowing that things could change in a heartbeat. And this is why we're so big on yoga teachers being leaders. This is the way a great leader thinks. Because when we're like, I got to walk in and do this, that's coming from an ego place. But when we're just really like grounded, full potential self, planned, like well prepared, but observant. Like it comes back. It's interesting. This Sakshi witness word is coming up tonight. It's like be that observer, be that witness, see what's going on, and then take it from there. And it's cool to like wonder, okay, what can I say? What can I do to have them come back? Just be you, be connective, and think of everything that you say has purpose or meaning, even if it's funny, or even if it's kind of dramatic, even if it's a difficult question that you ask the class. The rhetorical questions are really powerful, but it has meaning and it has purpose. And then connect with them before and after, and they'll be coming back for sure. I love it. Nick, do you have anything to close out?
Well, I mean, just like closing thoughts for me are like, you just recognize that opportunity is there for you all the time. People are looking for this, and they're so looking for it. Like they really need this. And there are very few yoga classes who are that are actually providing this kind of space for that.
Yeah.
And doing it in a really well managed way.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, like I'll see classes that do offer some kind of transformation, but it's like so drama laden. Like it's just, they use the drama to bring all this stuff out, and then they don't know what to do with it.
And then they just can't close the loop.
They can't close the loop, and it's just a big mess, and people are left raw. They're left confused. They can't, and then they're just stuck in this space. And like, that's nice. Like, at least there's something happening, but it's not well managed.
Yeah.
And then there's the vast, number of classes out there, people who are really just talking about physical stuff, and setting an intention before class. Like, let's set our intention, and then they never talk about it again. And it's like, great. Like, that's nice that you set an intention, but really, the class would be much more powerful if we came together behind a common focus.
Right.
And you can do that in a way where everybody gets what they need.
Yeah.
So really closing thoughts for that are set the stage for it, right? So when you step in your full potential, and then you call in the full potential of everybody in the class, and then set your intention that this is going to be a transformative experience for them in some way, shape, or form. And then trust that you have the help there to make that happen. It will happen.
Right.
in some way, great or small.
Yeah.
It's always there and it's always happening. And you're just bringing more presence to it so that you can help the process to unfold, play your role.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really big piece. And just recognize that nobody goes to yoga because everything's okay.
Yeah, that's true.
They just don't. They need something.
Yeah.
So whether it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever it is, like they need something.
Mm.
So just trust that every student in your class is there for a reason, and there's a good chance that they have no idea why they're there. But there's an even better chance that they've got things that they want and need to work on really badly.
Right. Right. That's
and
right.
and you're the person. Like, you're the deal. Like, they couldn't have shown up for you if you weren't able to play a role in that.
Yeah. Great.
So
Fantastic.
it's a big, big piece of trust that you're the leader, you're in the right place, and you can handle it, whatever comes up. And then the other big takeaway is just, welcome whatever comes up with that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Even if they're yelling at you and telling you how badly you suck as a teacher and as a human being.
I don't think that's going to happen to anybody on this call.
Yeah, you never know. It's a thank you. Like, wow, thanks a lot for sharing.
Yeah.
And then you take it away. If you get into trying to prove yourself right or wrong, it's just going to be a conflicted mess, that's coming up. So you just give the space to talk through that with that person, really try to see what they're looking for so that you can direct them.
And feedback. I remember when Swamiji talked about this, feedback, use your intellect, receive what is applicable and let the rest go. So receive what works for you and let the rest go. And try and have the intellect checking the emotion so it's not coming from an ego place.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah, because when you get into that place, it makes it harder for you to receive more than anything.
Totally.
But I've gotten great feedback from students who were really pissed at me.
Mm-hmm.
And I made it harder on myself by trying to prove it all right in my head. But at the end of the day, I learned things from that were really helpful.
All right, guys, love you very much. Om Shanti.
Peace, peace.